Covidicus Flemmenheimer presents another episode of variants, mutations, and rates of infections. Today's episode is going to be covered the one from the UK, B1117, and a virus under investigation, also sometimes referred to as a VOC, a virus of concern, followed by the South African variant, 501Y.V2, and then as well Brazil's B101.28, Denmark cluster 5, and then the United States. Whoa, they got a lot more going on than people would realize. And for example, the presence of L452R was a new discussion piece in the weeks prior. You haven't really heard that one discussed that much in Canada, but then again, as well, we're more reactionary as opposed to preventative. So you'll see the presence of that one here soon. What's not on the board, what I've left off of the board, was the variant from Nigeria. Again, I knew that was going to be here. It's just proximity. Like the whole time throughout this entire pandemic, you have yet to hear anyone speak of those in positions where they be likely to transmit and carry the various COVID variants. I had long suspected flight attendants and pilots, and I would like to think of truckers as an example of those in supply chain management and logistic distribution systems, right? Like there's a reason you have an electronic dispatch log on a truck. It's so people don't drive more than 12 hours. That was something that was legislated in the US. It's one of the reasons why I never got into cross-border trucking. It's just like, I'm not going to be stopped in that regard. So if you can go 14, 16 hours a day, that's how you really make your money in that industry. For example, as a flight attendant, you get capped at X amount of hours, 100 hours. Surpass that and you've got too much radiation. You are forced to the ground, right? So I just think about who's in proximity of an international populace, right? And it would be those individuals. And that's why if you go back to one of my videos from 3 weeks ago, you'll see that like I make a map of Canada. And as I've spoken to many of the newcomers to Canada, what's the first place you're told to come to when it comes to Canada? It's Toronto, it's BC, it's Montreal. Like the presence of B1128 in Toronto wasn't officially present yet, but I'm like, yo, I know that we haven't stopped flights from Sao Paulo to Toronto. We're going to have these issues present themselves. It was, and that over there with the B1128, for example, that one had a well-documented presence of rate of reinfection, immunoescape response. By immunoescape response, what I mean is basically the virus has the ability to evade antibody neutralization. Neutralization meaning it's not something that's going to really be easily stopped, right? And so what I'm going to get to later on the other side of the board is basically what happens when two viruses occupy the same host, right? I get it. We got a job to do, and sometimes we don't always inherently discuss the outcomes of things because people get too sensitive and they think that information is a form of fear-mongering. I have never felt empowered by knowing less or felt safer. You know why people don't tell people things is so they feel safe and don't panic and scare others and make things worse, right? You know, I'm sorry, but I'm part German, right? So like I grew up learning about the Second World War, right? And one of the reasons why you hush people is to protect the children. So if you're hushing me or hushing others, that's on you. But again, this isn't something that I think people should really be inherently fearful. Information makes you stronger, right? Knowledge is power. Know your shit and you can plan your strategies accordingly, but you can't plan accordingly if you don't have a strategy based on information available to you. Are you familiar with how densely populated your area is? Are you aware of the proximity in which you live to a homeless shelter? Because I guarantee you, as the weather gets warm, cases will double. You know how I know cases are going to double? On the first warm day we've had in months, if you walk down anywhere in downtown Canada, I mean Toronto, What do you see? Mask off, mask off, mask off. Not mask off, mask on. No Future music track. Future music from Future is playing in the background. So you got to understand that sooner than later, our hospital system and our healthcare workers, our beloved healthcare workers, are going to be inundated. And again, nobody can answer is how many healthcare professionals have returned back to work in Quebec? When you lose 1,700 nurses, can we afford to replace 1,700 nurses at the drop of a hat? Do we have a system in place where we can authorize the retirees to come back and help? For equitable pay, obviously. You know what I mean? Like, these are things to consider. And you keep playing stupid games, you're going to win fucked up prizes. So that's kind of like a brief synopsis about what this is about. But just to go into this real quick. So basically my concern is with the rate of infection. This was based off of, again, crude numbers. And I crunched basic assumptions into crude numbers. And what I had found was that personal belief is that B117 has actually got a greater rate of infection. The 70%, in my opinion, is more accurate in terms of how transmissible it is to others. And basically it turns 70%, it turns 1.5 into actually 2.55. The other thing too is, now you have, in the Brazil case, you can go to virological.org and see for yourself the constant documentation, the collaborative authorship, and peer-reviewed in real time, and also peer-reviewed analysis of other virologists, epidemiologists, and immunologists work. So it's like being back in high school and passing your homework back. You know what I mean? Except now it's put out into the open, it's peer-reviewed, and it's no different than an MSN chat. You can read the conversation, you can see the phylogenetic charts, you can read the dialogue, and you can get an interpretation of who's doing what. It's excellent analysis being done there. So there's no bullshit to be had. If you haven't viewed that, then you're missing out on some great scientific literature, because it is a hell of a read. And if you've ever needed a suggestion for a new tattoo, a phylogenetic chart is fucking sick. If you haven't seen it, it's cool swag. Now let's talk about Denmark cluster 5. Now that may affect virus neutralizing in humans. The reason why you've seen 17 million of mink just how can I describe it? Being culled as in killed. The reason why is because you have the speed of rapid variance. So that's why you got rid of them. Here in Canada, we care more about a small margin of individuals' profits that we don't really perceive the impact that could have on a Canadian populace. Now, essentially, a mink farm has to have kind of, I want to say, like almost like a level 3, a level 4 security. In, out, staff have to be checked before they go to work, before they leave. You know what I mean? It's not personal, but if you're not going to call something that we shouldn't have been, farming, we've just been lucky, kind of, so to speak. But now you get into a situation, something that could have been dealt with, right? So, for example, with the United States having the situation that they had, I hate to bring politics into this, but you know what? I grew up in a very political upbringing, as in just studying politics from the age of 8. So you don't really miss these things. It was kind of clear into the open. So basically, at one point, Donald Trump had the ability to ship millions of masks via the USPS service, the United Postal Service, but it was blocked for very arbitrary reasons. So basically, to some extent, if you've invested in insurance premiums or insurance companies, you don't make any money by people having a low premium. Possibly, but regardless, that's one perspective on that. There's many to be had, as in why a president would not ship USPS masks, ship masks through US Postal Services to millions of Americans. Imagine you getting 5 masks to deal with something that you weren't prepared to deal with, would have saved hundreds of thousands of lives long term. So that's why you're seeing, and not shutting down roads, like The US doesn't have the ability to enforce that in the first place. So you're always going to have that from anti-maskers and you know, those don't tread on my freedom types. Don't tread on my freedoms types. It's not about your freedom at this point. It's the fact that we're trying to prevent two variants from occupying the same host cell. You don't want to find out what those physical properties become when they become a new thing. It's not easy to explain. You don't die from COVID always. Sometimes it could be the flu that you have and a combination of COVID. But the thing is, people think, oh, where did the flu go? Magically, it just disappeared. Nothing up my sleeve. I've got nothing up my sleeve. It didn't disappear. It's just that COVID-19 is not to be fucked with. It's the bully on the block. It wants the top bunk. It's not playing. It is the asshole. The flu is the toilet paper. Do I make myself clear? Now I'm going to jump into this real quick. Now, when it comes to mutations worldwide, people aren't used to this. They're not ready for this. So with it, understand that viruses communicate with each other. There are 930 mutations worldwide. So essentially, that's a lot of short posts for kin and descendants on how to proceed with infection. Like it's like when to find new victims, when to replicate, and when to lie low. You don't understand that because you only perceive communication between two human beings, between two animals, but you don't view viruses in the same light because it's not considered animate life. But they do have a way to lie low, when to replicate, and when to find new victims. Now, big question. You have not heard this all year. You probably never learned this in bio class because it is pretty quickly covered. But yes, can two viruses inhabit the same cell? Fuck yes. Yes, they can. They swap genetic info like two teenagers at a movie pre-pandemic. So understand that the outcome of unique properties increases transmission via antibody neutralization. So for example, you got an H69V70. What happens when that becomes besties with an E4A4K? You know what I mean? Or 501Y occupies the same cell with a 5484K or an L452R. You know what you get? On this side of the slalom or the tree is a rapid variant, reduced virus neutralization. And then on this side, you get fuses with cell membrane. And then what? Say this one matches up with an N439K. Now you get a higher binding property on top of fuses with cell membrane. Ain't that some fucked up shit? Let's go to the right. Now, this new hybrid merges with a cluster 5 and a P681H. Now you got high variability on top of rapid variants, reduced virus neutralization, and all that has to do is make it here, baby. It's just got to make it here. Because guess what? ORF8 is not a spike protein, but a different gene. It stops codons from used to open mutations. So what that means is basically there's a blank slate for genetic information. And it just takes something like this to plinko back and forth to say, yo, 50K. Yo, you want 50K? No, 50K people are sick. This shit moves fast, but we live in a very reactive society and not necessarily one where it's going to start adequately preparing, right? And that just takes me back to Canada should see compensation for delays in production not previously cleared or disclosed into the contract. If we didn't structure it and write it in such a way where it was just like, yo, open wallet, we're desperate, here's my money, yo, let's do this. You know, I get it to some extent, like, but is this not a normal thing? Like, it's quite commonplace where the contracts are written in a way where here's money, we're printing money, and somebody's just wiping their ass with it. You know, I'm not, you know, I sympathize with people who are upset at Pfizer for not being forthright and honest about the production they could meet. You know what I mean? Like, it should have been very honest in terms of the numbers that they were capable of and the impacts of having to expand production. Because you can't expand production unless you build another separate plant, which should have been happening for a year probably. Johnson and Johnson is another one to consider. And Novavax, I think you might see them soon here in Canada. With Johnson and Johnson, they just got cleared for a single one-shot dose. They're rushing for expedited approval in the U.S. I know they've done a deal in Africa. Novavax is one we'll see here in Canada. There's a lot of development happening as far as where we're at. Oh, and if you made it this far and you're wondering, oh, am I gonna have to get, how are they gonna update to get it? Like, fuck, man. Like, how many different pairs of fucking Jordans have you worn in your life? You know what I mean? It's not hard to make and manufacture. We've been doing shit for years, whether or not you buy into science. And no, the world isn't fucking flat. It just doesn't revolve around you, and that's why it feels flat. It's time to wake up. It's time to take things serious. Like, put it this way, the way things are evolving, it's very easy to tweak the vaccines, and then also too, if necessary, a booster shot may be needed later in the future. To be honest, I felt no validation in doing this. I felt like that's why I haven't presented this. This is literally the way my board has looked for like, oh my God, for like almost, a month and a half. So I bite my tongue. I try not to really be too upset about it, but I do this because I care about our seniors and the legacies that are going to be left behind, the families that are going to be disrupted, the career paths that are going to be, changed forever. And it just kind of like, it's not that hard to take serious.